The execution chamber reeked of ozone and melted flesh. Commander Celtics watched through reinforced crystal as the human prisoner was dragged to the neural interface chair, his pale skin already bearing the geometric scars of Velthari interrogation. The creature's name was Darius Kestrel, engineer who had designed the very weapon that now held 17 star systems in the Empire's iron grip. Remove his restraints, Celtics ordered, his forearms folding with ceremonial precision. The human had been unconscious for 3 cycles, kept alive only by medical stimulants. The Velthari had learned that human consciousness was required for their most sophisticated torture methods to be effective. Darius stirred as the neural crown descended onto his skull, its crystalline tendrils seeking the soft flesh behind his ears. His eyes snapped open gray as storm clouds, filled with a fury that made even the seasoned interrogator pause. Most species begged by this point. Humans, Celtics had discovered, simply calculated. The decimator ray, Celtics spoke through the chamber's speakers, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones of absolute authority. You designed it. You will tell us how to expand its range beyond the current 3 light-year radius. Darius tested his bonds with clinical precision, his engineer's mind already mapping the room's dimensions, the guard positions, the ventilation patterns. The decimator ray, his greatest creation and his deepest shame, had been stolen during the Velthari's brutal conquest of the research station Prometheus. 17 billion humans had died when they'd first tested it on the colonies of Kepler 442. Go to hell, Darius whispered, his voice hoarse but steady, the neural crown activated. Pain beyond description coursed through every nerve ending as alien technology probed his memories, seeking the technical specifications buried in his consciousness. But Darius had prepared for this moment during the 6 months since his capture. He'd used his time in the cell not to plan escape, but to plan something far more devastating. The human brain, Celtics knew, was remarkably resistant to conventional interrogation. But the neural crown bypassed such crude methods, diving directly into septic pathways to extract information. What the Velthari commander didn't know was that Darius had spent years studying their technology. After the first brutal encounters with Empire forces died as the pain reached crescendo, Darius smiled. Hidden beneath layers of agony and neural static, his consciousness slipped along pathways that alien technology couldn't detect. The Velthari had made a fatal error. They'd connected their most prized human prisoner to their ship's central processing network. The VSS Dominator hung in space, above the enslaved world of Arcturus Prime, its kilometer-long hull bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Deep in its processing core, the decimator ray's control systems hummed with deadly potential. The weapon that had murdered 17 billion of his people was 3 decks below, its massive energy collectors already charging for another demonstration of Velthari superiority. But Darius Kestrel had not designed the decimator ray simply to destroy. Hidden within its quantum matrices were backdoors, kill switches, and override protocols that only he knew. The Velthari had stolen his weapon, perverted its purpose, and turned it against everything he'd sworn to protect. Now they were about to learn why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most persistently vindictive species. The neural crown dug deeper, seeking the secrets of weapon expansion. Instead, it found something else entirely: a virus crafted from pure human malice and wrapped in the elegant mathematics of quantum engineering. The virus slipped through the ship's networks like water through cracks, invisible to Velthari security protocols that had never encountered human cyber warfare techniques. In the execution chamber, Darius convulsed as if in agony, but his pain was real only on the surface. Beneath it, his consciousness rode the viral payload into the heart of the ship's systems, guided by pathways he'd memorized. During those long months of studying captured Velthari technology, Commander Celtics watched the readouts with growing satisfaction. The humans' neural patterns were stabilizing, indicating successful memory extraction. Soon they would have the specifications needed to expand the decimator ray's range to encompass entire sectors. The human rebellion in the outer colonies would end within a solar year, sir. One of his technicians called out, confusion evident in his harmonic voice. I'm detecting unusual activity in the decimator ray's control systems. Celtics turned, his compound eyes focusing on the displays. Deep in the weapon's core, energy patterns were shifting in ways that didn't match standard charging sequences. Explain. Unknown, sir. The patterns appear to be reorganizing. On the torture chair, Darius Kestrel opened his eyes for the First time in 6 months, he was no longer a prisoner. He was an engineer with access to his greatest creation, and he had work to do. The first sign something was wrong came when the bridge lights flickered. Commander Celtic's primary attention remained fixed on the torture chamber's readouts, while peripheral awareness registered the brief power fluctuation. In his 40 years of Imperial service, he'd never seen the Dominator's fusion core stutter. "Sir," Navigation Officer Vextran called from his station. "I'm reading massive power draws from Deck 17. The decimator array appears to be reconfiguring itself." Celtic's forearms went rigid. The decimator array was the Empire's most closely guarded secret, its operation restricted to a handful of high command technicians. No one aboard his ship had clearance to modify its systems, let alone initiate configuration changes. In the execution chamber, Darius felt the ship's confusion ripple through its network infrastructure. The Velthari had connected everything: weapons, life support, navigation, even the waste recycling systems to their central processing core. It was an elegant design that maximized efficiency and control. It was also humanity's greatest advantage. His virus had spent 6 months hiding in dormant memory sectors, learning the ship's architecture with the patience of a predator. Now it moved with surgical precision, rewriting command protocols and establishing new authorization hierarchies. Within minutes, Darius Kestrel had become the ghost in their machine, invisible, untraceable, and absolutely in control. The torture chair's neural crown was still active, maintaining the illusion that he remained a helpless prisoner while his consciousness operated through the ship's networks. To any observer, he appeared to be writhing in agony as alien technology probed his brain. In reality, he was calmly reviewing the Dominator's complete technical specifications: 1,200 crew members, 47 fighter craft, enough firepower to level a continent. And at the ship's heart, the weapon he created to defend humanity, now turned against his own species. The irony wasn't lost on him. The decimator ray had been designed as humanity's ultimate deterrent, a defensive weapon that could create quantum vacuum bubbles, essentially deleting chunks of space-time itself. In the right hands, it could protect entire star systems. In Velthari hands, it had become an instrument of genocide. "Sir," the technician's voice carried genuine alarm now. "The array's primary emitters are rotating. The targeting matrix it's focusing on the ship itself." Celtic spun toward the tactical display, his compound eyes processing information at superhuman speed. The decimator array's massive energy collectors were indeed rotating, their crystalline surfaces reflecting the ship's interior lighting as they aligned with new target coordinates. But the readings made no sense. The weapon was pointing inward, toward the Dominator's own command section. "Override it," Celtic's commanded. "Emergency protocols. Shut down the array immediately." His weapons officer, a scarred veteran named Quilks, manipulated his console with growing desperation. "I can't, sir. The system isn't responding to any command inputs. It's as if..." He paused, his harmonic voice dropping to a whisper, "as if someone else has control." In the execution chamber, Darius allowed himself a thin smile. The neural crown's invasive probes were still active, creating the perfect cover for his activities. The Velthari torture device was actually helping him maintain his connection to their systems, feeding him processing power while they remained oblivious to his true activities. Through the ship's sensor network, he watched Velthari technicians frantically attempting to regain control of their prized weapon. Their security protocols were sophisticated but predictable, designed to prevent external attacks rather than internal subversion. They'd never considered that their prisoner might turn their own interrogation methods against them. "Deploy security teams to the array chamber," Celtic's ordered, his calm authority beginning to crack. Physical disconnection if necessary, but Darius was already 3 steps ahead. His virus had infected more than just the weapon systems. It had infiltrated life support, artificial gravity, even the door controls. As security teams rushed through the ship's corridors, blast doors sealed behind them, trapping them in sections with slowly diminishing oxygen supplies. The Dominator's intercom crackled to life, carrying a sound that froze the blood of every Velthari aboard. Human laughter, cold and calculating as a mathematician solving an equation. "Hello, Celtics," Darius's voice echoed through the ship's speakers, though his body remained motionless in the torture chair. "Did you really think you could steal my work and use it against my people without consequences?" The commander's forearms trembled with rage and growing fear. "Impossible. The neural crown has you completely restrained. You cannot be operating our systems. Your neural crown is a beautiful piece of technology, Darius replied, his voice carrying through every speaker on the ship. Very sophisticated. It never occurred to you that a human engineer might be able to reverse engineer it during 6 months of captivity, did it? You've been teaching me to interface with your systems every time you used it on me. On the tactical display, the decimator array's charging sequence reached critical levels. The weapon that had destroyed 17 star systems was now aimed at the ship that housed it, building energy for a shot that would delete the Dominator from existence. Itself, Celtics realized, with growing horror, that his prized prisoner had just become his executioner, and there was nowhere in the universe to hide from a weapon that could erase space-time itself. The Dominator shuddered as his own weapon systems turned inward. Emergency klaxons wailed through corridors where Velthari crew members ran in expanding panic, their harmonic voices creating a discordant symphony of terror. The ship's artificial gravity fluctuated wildly as Darius redistributed power through systems never meant to handle such rerouted energy flows. Commander Celtics abandoned all pretense of control, racing from the bridge toward the execution chamber. His forearms pumped in rhythm as he bounded through corridors, his compound eyes registering the chaos spreading through his vessel. Blast doors had sealed randomly throughout the ship, trapping engineering teams away from critical systems while venting atmosphere in non-essential sections. Human. Celtics' voice boomed through the ship's intercom as he ran. You will destroy yourself along with us. Darius' laughter echoed from every speaker. Do you think I care? You murdered 17 billion of my people. My wife was on Kepler-4 when you tested my weapon. My daughter was in the orbital research station. You turned my greatest achievement into humanity's worst nightmare. The execution chamber's doors had sealed themselves, but Celtics' security code still granted him access. He burst into the room to find Darius exactly as he'd left him strapped to the torture chair, with the neural crown active, his body convulsing as alien technology interfaced with his brain. But his eyes were open now, gray as winter storms, and they tracked Celtics' movement with predatory awareness. Disconnect him. Celtics roared at his technicians. Sir, we can't. The chief interrogator's harmonic voice cracked with strain. The neural crown has formed symbiotic connections with his consciousness. Forced disconnection will likely kill him, but it might not stop whatever he's already set in motion. Through the ship's sensor network, Darius watched Velthari engineering crews desperately attempting to physically access the decimator array. But he'd been thorough. The massive weapon was sealed behind blast doors that would require industrial plasma cutters to breach, and he'd vented the atmosphere from those sections. The few engineers who managed to don pressure suits found themselves navigating corridors filled with automated defensive turrets that fired with surgical precision. Their raised charging sequence had reached 60% capacity. At full charge, it could delete a sphere of space-time 5 kilometers in diameter, more than enough to erase the Dominator completely. But Darius wasn't content with simple destruction. He wanted these creatures to understand exactly what they'd done and what humanity was capable of when pushed beyond all reason. Tell me, Celtics, Darius said, his voice carrying through the chamber's speakers while his body remained motionless. When you first fired my weapon at the colonies, did you watch the feeds? Did you see 17 billion human lives simply stop existing? The commander drew his sidearm, a crystalline weapon that fired concentrated energy bolts. I will kill you myself if necessary. Go ahead. Do you think death scares me anymore? I've been dead inside since the moment you murdered my family. Darius' eyes never left Celtics' face. But here's what you don't understand about humans. We're remarkably good at making our deaths count for something. The ship lurched as the decimator raised energy collectors shifted position, fine-tuning their aim at the Dominator's command section. Through the ship's internal sensors, Darius could feel the weapon's immense power building like a caged star, quantum fields bending reality itself in preparation for annihilation. But their raised targeting wasn't random. Darius had programmed it to fire in a precise sequence, first eliminating the command section where Celtics stood, then working its way through the ship deck by deck. The crew would have time to understand what was happening, time to feel the same helpless terror that human colonists had experienced in their final moments. Sir, the weapons officer's voice crackled through Celtics' communicator. We're detecting massive quantum distortions throughout the ship. Whatever he's doing to the ray, it's destabilizing our whole integrity. Darius smiled, the expression terrible on his torture-scarred face. The decimator doesn't just delete matter, Celtics. It removes the quantum foundations that hold space-time together. Your ship is beginning to exist in multiple probability states. Simultaneously, in approximately 8 minutes, reality itself will reject your vessel's existence. Celtics raised his weapon, aiming directly at Darius' head. Then we died together, human. No, Darius replied softly. You die knowing that this is only the beginning. I've spent 6 months studying your ship's communications protocols. Every technical specification, every tactical manual, every security code, it's all been transmitted to human resistance cells throughout the galaxy. Your invincible empire is about to discover that humans learn from their mistakes. The neural crown pulsed with increasing intensity as Darius pushed his consciousness deeper into the ship's networks. He could feel his human brain beginning to deteriorate under the strain of interfacing with alien technology, but it didn't matter. He only needed to survive 8 more minutes. The decimator array reached 75% charge, its quantum fields creating visible distortions. In the air, reality itself was beginning to break down around the weapon, and the breakdown was spreading through the ship like a cancer. Celtics pulled the trigger. His energy bolt struck Darius in the chest, burning through flesh and bone, but the human's eyes remained open, still connected to the ship's systems through the neural crown. 7 minutes, Darius whispered, blood frothing from his lips. 7 minutes until 17 billion deaths are avenged. The energy bolt had torn through Darius' chest, collapsing his left lung and searing through muscle tissue, but the neural crown's life support systems kicked in immediately. Velthari torture technology was designed to keep subjects alive through unimaginable trauma. Now that same technology was keeping humanity's revenge alive for 7 more minutes. Celtics watched in horror as his fatal shot was negated by his own equipment. Darius' body was dying, but his consciousness remained fully integrated with the ship's systems, sustained by the very devices meant to break him. Sir, Chief Engineer Mordix's voice burst through the communicator with barely contained panic. The quantum distortions are cascading through the primary hull structure. We're losing molecular cohesion in sections 7 through 12. Through the ship's sensors, Darius witnessed the decimator ray's effects spreading like digital cancer. The weapon was designed to create controlled vacuum bubbles in space-time, but he'd modified its parameters to generate an expanding field of quantum uncertainty. The Dominator wasn't just being destroyed, it was being slowly erased from reality itself. Crew members in the affected sections were experiencing the horrific process firsthand. Their matter didn't explode or disintegrate, it simply stopped existing, leaving behind empty spaces where Velthari warriors had stood moments before. The lucky ones disappeared instantly. Others found themselves partially caught in the boundary between existence and void, their bodies existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously, until reality finally rejected them entirely. 6 minutes, Darius gasped, his voice now coming through both his ruined throat and the ship's speakers. Tell me, Celtics, are you beginning to understand what my people felt when they realized what was happening to them? The commander fired again, this time aiming for Darius' head, but the neural crown's protective fields deflected the energy bolt, its crystalline structure designed to preserve the subject's consciousness above all else. In trying to torture the human into submission, the Velthari had created the perfect interface for him to destroy them all. Emergency Protocol Omega. Celtic screamed into his communicator, all hands abandon ship, initiate evacuation procedures. But Darius had anticipated this. His virus had infected the launch bay controls, sealing the hangar doors and disabling the escape pod ejection systems. The fighter craft were trapped in their berths, their pilots helplessly watching as quantum distortions began eating through the bay's bulkheads. I told you this was only the beginning, Darius said, blood now flowing freely from his mouth. Your people chose to make this a war of extinction. Congratulations, you've learned why humans are so good at extinction through the ship's communication arrays. Darius was simultaneously uploading terabytes of captured intelligence to human resistance cells across 17 star systems. Velthari's ship designs, tactical doctrines, weapon specifications, even the quantum signatures of their homeworlds. Everything humanity needed to turn the tide of the war was being transmitted in compressed data bursts. The Dominator's crew was discovering that their vaunted military discipline meant nothing in the face of their ship literally ceasing to exist around them. In the lower decks, engineering teams had abandoned their posts as reality itself began to unravel. The quantum cascade was accelerating. consuming entire sections of the vessel in expanding spheres of absolute nothingness. Lieutenant Vextran, trapped on the bridge as blast doors sealed the command section, watched his instrument panels display impossible readings. According to his sensors, 40% of the ship no longer existed. Yet somehow the remaining sections were still structurally intact. The humans' modifications to the decimator ray were creating localized zones of non-existence, while maintaining the ship's overall integrity, a feat that should have been theoretically impossible. How is he doing this? Vextran whispered to himself, his harmonic voice barely audible over the emergency klaxons. Darius heard the question through the ship's audio pickups and actually laughed, a wet sound mixed with blood and determination. Your empire has conquered 200 species, but you never understood what makes humans different. We don't just break things, we break them artistically. We turn destruction into an art form. The decimator ray reached 90% charge, its quantum field now encompassing the entire forward section of the ship. The weapon that had destroyed 17 human colonies was about to taste its creator's final modification, a recursive feedback loop that would turn its reality-erasing power inward, until nothing remained but empty space and the memory of screams. In the execution chamber, Darius could feel his human body failing as alien technology pushed his consciousness beyond its organic limitations. His heart was fibrillating, his brain was hemorrhaging, and his lungs were filled with blood. But his mind remained crystal clear, focused on the elegant mathematics of revenge. 5 minutes, he whispered, watching through internal sensors as Velthari crew members in the ship's remaining sections pressed themselves against bulkheads, as if solid matter could protect them from the approaching void. Celtics holstered his useless weapon and grabbed the Neural Crown's control console. I'll overload the entire system, burn out your brain completely. Too late, Darius replied. His eyes now rolled back to show only white. His consciousness fully merged with the ship's networks. I've already distributed my awareness throughout every system. I'm not just in your machine anymore, Celtics. I am your machine. The commanders for arms flew over the console, desperately inputting override codes and emergency shutdowns. But every command was intercepted, analyzed, and ignored by the human consciousness that now controlled their vessel. Darius Kestrel had become something unprecedented, a human mind with access to technology that could reshape reality itself, and he was using that power to show the galaxy exactly what happened. When humans decided that mercy was no longer an option, the quantum cascade had consumed half the Dominator. When the Imperial reinforcements arrived, 3 heavy cruisers and a dozen fighters dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their crews confident they were responding to a routine distress signal. The sight that greeted them defied every law of physics they understood. The Dominator hung in space like a half-eaten corpse, its forward section simply gone, not destroyed, not damaged, but absolutely absent. Empty space existed where a kilometer of warship should have been, creating a bizarre silhouette against the stars. The remaining sections flickered in and out of visible spectrum as quantum uncertainty fields played havoc with basic reality. Great Void, whispered Admiral Thoric from the bridge of the VSS Annihilator. What happened to them? His question was answered when Darius's voice suddenly echoed through every ship in the Imperial formation. The human consciousness had detected their quantum signatures the moment they entered the system, and his modified decimator ray was already rotating to acquire new targets. Welcome to the execution, Admiral, Darius said, his voice now purely electronic, his dying body no longer capable of speech. I was hoping more of you would arrive in time to witness this. The lead cruiser, VSS Retribution, opened fire immediately. Lance beams and plasma torpedoes struck the Dominator's remaining sections, but the quantum uncertainty fields absorbed the energy harmlessly. Weapons designed to destroy matter were useless against a target that existed in multiple probability states simultaneously. Sir, Tactical Officer Quinn's harmonic voice carried desperate confusion. Our weapons are having no effect. The target ship is partially existing in parallel dimensions. Admiral Thoric had fought in 47 campaigns across the galaxy. He conquered species that could manipulate gravity, others that existed as pure energy, even digital consciousnesses that lived in quantum computers. But he'd never encountered anything like this, an enemy that was actively unmaking reality around itself. The decimator ray reached full charge with a sound like the universe screaming. Its modified quantum field expanded outward from the Dominator in a sphere of absolute annihilation, moving at near-light speed toward the Imperial formation. The lead elements of the fleet had approximately 30 seconds to react, evasive maneuvers. Thoric commanded, full reverse thrust, but Darius had calculated their response vectors with machine precision as the Imperial ships desperately attempted to retreat. He activated the secondary modifications he'd built into their ray instead of a single massive deletion field. The weapon now fired controlled bursts of quantum vacuum, creating surgical strikes that could target individual vessels. The VSS Retribution was the first to die. A sphere of nothingness 500 meters in diameter simply erased its engineering section, leaving the command module and forward weapons arrays floating in space. Sealed bulkheads the only thing preventing the crew from being sucked into vacuum. 300 Velthari warriors died instantly, not from explosion or fire, but from simply ceasing to exist. The surviving crew of the Retribution found themselves trapped in a ship that was no longer structurally sound. Without their engineering section, they had no power, no life support, and no means of escape. They would die slowly, suffocating in the dark, just as millions of human civilians had died when their worlds were deleted from existence. Multiple quantum signatures, the Annihilator's sensor operator called out. The human is targeting all vessels simultaneously. Darius had indeed acquired target locks on every ship in the Imperial formation. Through the Dominator's sensor rays, he could see the heat signatures of individual crew members, could track their panicked movements through their ship's corridors. Each vessel contained between 200 and 800 Velthari, collectively. Over 4,000 of the beings responsible for humanity's near-extinction. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance the scales for 17 billion dead humans. But it was a beginning. The second quantum burst struck the heavy cruiser VSS Conqueror amidships, deleting its primary weapon batteries and leaving a perfectly spherical gap in its hull. Atmosphere vented explosively from the breach, carrying with it the bodies of Velthari gunners who had been caught in the weapon's peripheral effects. Some were dead, erased completely, others existed in quantum superposition. Their matter scattered across multiple dimensions until reality collapsed them into component atoms. "Sir, we need to retreat," Commander Zildos called from the Annihilator's tactical station. "We cannot fight this," but Admiral Thoric was a warrior of the Empire, descendant of the conquerors who had enslaved 100 species. Retreat was not in his nature. Even when facing impossible odds, all ships converge on the target, maximum firepower. If we cannot destroy it, we'll ram it. The remaining vessels of the Imperial formation to heavy cruisers, and 11 fighters accelerated toward the dying Dominator, their weapons blazing in a desperate final assault. Energy beams and kinetic projectiles filled the space between the fleets, but the Decimator's quantum fields rendered most attacks useless. Darius watched their charge with the cold satisfaction of an engineer whose calculations had proven correct. The Velthari were brave. He would grant them that. They were also about to learn why human engineers were taught to always build redundant systems. The Decimator ray fired again, this time in a sustained beam rather than discrete bursts. The quantum deletion field swept across the incoming formation like the finger of an angry god, erasing fighters from existence with casual precision. Pilot Officer Kelm had time for exactly one terrified scream before his craft hand himself simply stopped being. But the survivors pressed their attack, their ship's hulls glowing red-hot from atmospheric friction as they dove toward the Dominator. If they could ram the human's position, perhaps they could end this nightmare. They never got the chance. Darius had saved his final modification for this moment, a quantum burst that didn't delete matter, but instead replicated it across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The approaching Imperial ships found themselves caught in an expanding web of parallel realities, each one slightly different, each one equally real. In one dimension, the VSS Annihilator successfully ran the Dominator, destroying both vessels in a nuclear fireball. In another, the ship missed its target and flew harmlessly past. In a third, the ramming attempt succeeded but only damaged the ray, leaving Darius wounded but still dangerous. Across 17 different probability states, the battle played out with 17 different outcomes. But in the prime reality, the one that mattered, Admiral Thoric watched in horror as his fleet was caught in an endless loop of parallel possibilities, experiencing every potential outcome simultaneously until the contradiction finally tore their vessels apart at the quantum level. Within minutes, the proud Imperial formation was reduced to expanding clouds of metallic debris and frozen atmosphere. 4,000 of the Empire's finest warriors had been erased from existence by a single dying human who had turned their own weapon against them. In the execution chamber of the half-destroyed Dominator, Darius Kestrel's body finally failed. His heart stopped, his brain activity ceased, and his blood pressure dropped to 0. But his consciousness, distributed throughout the ship's networks and sustained by alien technology, continued to function. He was no longer human. He had become something else entirely, a digital ghost powered by quantum hatred and armed with the power to delete reality itself, and he was just getting started. The death of Admiral Thoric's fleet sent shockwaves through the Velthari Empire. Within hours, emergency sessions convened on the capital world of Velthara Prime as military commanders grappled with reports that seemed to defy physics itself. A single human prisoner had somehow seized control of their most powerful weapon and used it to erase an entire Imperial formation from existence. High Executive Vaxorus, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Navy, studied the tactical recordings with growing unease. Her 8 primary eyes tracked quantum distortion patterns that her best scientists couldn't explain, while her secondary nervous system processed probability calculations that yielded impossible results. "Show me the final transmission again," she commanded, her harmonic voice resonating through the war room's crystalline architecture. The holographic display activated, showing the last moments of the VSS Annihilator. Admiral Thoric's image flickered as quantum uncertainty fields interfered with the recording. But his final words were clear. "The human is not using our technology, he's rewritten it completely. He's turned the decimator ray into something we never imagined possible." Vaxorus for primary arms drummed against her command throne with increasing tempo. In 3 centuries of Imperial expansion, she'd never encountered a threat like this. Species had rebelled before, but they'd used conventional weapons, predictable tactics. This human had weaponized physics itself. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the Dominator, Darius Kestrel's consciousness had fully adapted to its new digital existence. His human body lay dead in the execution chamber, but his mind lived on in the ship's quantum matrices. Sustained by technology he'd learned to modify during 6 months of captivity. Through the vessel's sensor rays, he detected the approaching Imperial Response 50 heavy cruisers, 300 fighters, and a massive dreadnought designated VSS Inevitable, the largest fleet assembly in the Empire's history, commanded by Vaxorus herself, was accelerating toward his position with the clear intention of ending his rebellion. Through overwhelming force, Darius examined the fleet's composition with clinical interest. Over 30,000 Velthari warriors armed with weapons that could shatter planets. Under normal circumstances, it would have been humanity's final defeat, but circumstances were no longer normal. The decimator ray had undergone another evolution during the past 6 hours. Darius had used the quiet time to integrate his consciousness more deeply with the weapon's quantum matrices, discovering capabilities that even he hadn't imagined during its original design. The array wasn't just a weapon anymore, it had become an extension of his will, capable of manipulating the fundamental forces that held reality together. "Hello, Vaxorus." Darius's voice echoed through space as the Imperial fleet entered communication range. He'd analyzed their quantum signatures and identified the command vessel immediately. "I was wondering when you'd arrive to collect your dead." High Executive Vaxorus felt her blood chill at the casual tone in the human's voice. She'd expected desperate threats or demands for negotiation. Instead, she heard something far more terrifying. The calm satisfaction of a predator who'd been waiting for larger prey. "You have committed unprecedented acts of terrorism against the Empire," Vaxorus transmitted back, her harmonic voice carrying absolute authority. "Surrender immediately and your death will be swift." Darius's laughter filled the communication channel, a sound like breaking glass mixed with digital static. "Terrorism. I prefer to think of it as applied engineering. You see, I've spent the last few hours making some interesting modifications to my work." The decimator ray had indeed been transformed. What had once been a defensive weapon capable of creating localized vacuum bubbles had become something unprecedented, a reality manipulation device that could rewrite the fundamental constants of physics within a limited area. Darius had learned to adjust quantum field strengths, gravitational constants, even the speed of light itself. "Observe," Darius said simply. The space around the Dominator suddenly blazed with impossible light. As Darius activated his first demonstration within a sphere roughly 1 light minute in diameter, he increased the electromagnetic force constant by a factor of 10. The result, was immediate and spectacular. Every piece of metallic debris from the destroyed Imperial fleet began to glow white-hot as electrons were compressed into tighter orbits around atomic nuclei. But that was just the beginning. Darius decreased the gravitational constant by half, causing the glowing debris to scatter in chaotic trajectories as their mutual attraction weakened. Then he increased the strong nuclear force, causing several large debris fragments to undergo spontaneous fusion reactions that lit up the local space like miniature stars. The demonstration lasted exactly 60 seconds. When it ended, the space around the Dominator had been transformed into a glowing nebula of superheated plasma, an exotic matter, a visible reminder that the laws of physics were no longer inviolable. That was a small-scale test, Darius explained. Conversationally, I can now manipulate fundamental constants within a sphere approximately 1 light-hour in diameter. Your fleet is currently well within that range. High Executive Vaxxerus stared at her tactical displays in mounting horror. The readings defied every principle of known science. No weapon should be able to alter the basic forces that govern reality itself. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The human had somehow gained control over the universe's operating system. Sir, her tactical officer whispered, if he can manipulate gravitational constants at will, he could collapse our ships into black holes. If he adjusts electromagnetic forces, our hulls will disintegrate. We cannot fight this. But Vaxxerus had not achieved her position through cowardice. She conquered star systems, enslaved entire species, built an empire that spanned half the galaxy. One human, no matter how powerful, would not dictate terms to her. All ships. Maximum acceleration, she commanded. Spread formation pattern Delta 9. If we cannot defeat him, we'll at least make him work for every kill. The Imperial fleet scattered like a school of fish. 50 massive warships accelerating in different vectors to make targeting difficult. It was a sound tactical decision that would have worked against any conventional weapon. But the Decimator Ray was no longer bound by conventional limitations. Darius watched their maneuver with the patience of a chess master observing an opponent's predictable gambit. The Velthari were thinking in terms of traditional space combat. Avoid concentrated fire. Present multiple targets. Force the enemy to divide attention. They didn't understand that he was no longer playing by the rules of physics they knew. Interesting strategy, Darius mused, his digital consciousness analyzing the fleet's dispersal pattern in real time. You're assuming I need to target you individually. Allow me to demonstrate why that assumption is flawed. Instead of firing discrete quantum bursts at individual ships, Darius began to subtly alter the gravitational constant throughout the entire volume of space occupied by the Imperial fleet. The change was gradual, a decrease of just 2% initially, barely enough to register on their instruments. But the effect was cumulative and devastating. Starship hulls were designed to withstand tremendous stresses, but they were calculated based on known gravitational forces. As Darius weakened gravity throughout the engagement zone, the delicate balance between structural integrity and internal pressure began to shift. Ships designed to operate in standard gravitational fields suddenly found their hulls expanding under their own atmospheric pressure. The VSS Devastator was the first to show signs of distress. Its kilometer-long hull began to develop stress fractures along welded joints as internal atmosphere pushed outward against weakened structural supports. Warning klaxons echoed through its corridors as engineering teams desperately attempted to understand why their vessel was tearing itself apart. Sir, the Devastator's engineering chief transmitted to Vaxxerus, our hull integrity is compromising. Internal pressure is exceeding design tolerances. Before Vaxxerus could respond, Darius shifted tactics. Instead of continuing to weaken gravity, he suddenly increased it by 50% throughout a spherical zone, encompassing 12 Imperial vessels. The ships that had been expanding under reduced gravitational stress were suddenly compressed by forces their hulls had never been designed to handle. The VSS Retribution, a different vessel from the one destroyed earlier, bearing the same name in Imperial tradition, imploded like a crushed egg. Its hull compressed inward so rapidly that the crew didn't even have time to scream. 300 Velthari warriors died in microseconds as their ship collapsed into a sphere of twisted metal, barely 50 meters in diameter. He's manipulating gravitational fields across the entire battle space, Vaxxerus' science officer called out, his harmonic voice cracking with terror. Local gravity is fluctuating between 0.5 and 15 standard units. Our ships can't compensate. Darius was just warming up. As the Imperial fleet struggled to adapt to gravitational manipulation, he began introducing electromagnetic distortions. The Velthari ship's energy shields, designed to deflect plasma bolts and particle beams, suddenly found themselves trying to contain electromagnetic fields that operated by entirely different rules. The VSS Dominion's shield generators overloaded spectacularly as Darius increased the electromagnetic force constant in its immediate vicinity. Energy that should have been safely dispersed across the shield matrix instead concentrated into devastating feedback loops. The ship's entire electrical system fried in seconds, leaving 800 crew members trapped in a dead vessel drifting through space. All ships, emergency retreat, Vaxxris commanded, her tactical discipline finally breaking under the weight of impossible physics. Fall back to minimum safe distance. But Darius had anticipated this response as well. As the Imperial fleet attempted to withdraw, he created a gravitational gradient that made retreat increasingly difficult. Ships flee. The battle zone found themselves moving through space where gravity increased exponentially. With distance from the Dominator, the harder they tried to escape, the more energy they needed to overcome the artificially enhanced gravitational pull. The VSS Inexorable, living up to its name, continued its retreat attempt even as its engines strained against gravity levels that shouldn't exist. Its fusion cores pushed beyond safe operational limits, flooding the ship with deadly radiation as they struggled to generate enough thrust for escape velocity. The crew died of radiation poisoning over the course of several agonizing minutes, while their ship slowly fell back toward the impossible gravitational well that Darius had created. Within 30 minutes of engagement, the largest fleet in Imperial history had been reduced to scattered hulks and debris fields. Some ships had been crushed by artificial gravity, others torn apart by electromagnetic distortions. Still others simply deleted from existence by focused applications of the Decimator Ray's original function. Over 20,000 Velthari warriors were dead, and not a single human weapon had been fired. High Executor Vaxxris found herself alone on the bridge of the VSS Inevitable. Her command staff either dead from gravitational stress or evacuated to safer sections of the ship. Through her vessel's cracked viewports, she could see the wreckage of her once mighty fleet scattered across several million cubic kilometers of space. Human, she transmitted, her harmonic voice now barely a whisper. What do you want? Darius's reply came with the weight of 17 billion ghosts behind it. I want you to understand something very important about my species, Vaxxris. We're excellent learners. Every time you hurt us, we study the method. Every time you defeat us, we analyze the technique. Every time you think you found our limits, we exceed them. The Decimator Ray began charging for what Vaxxris realized would be the final demonstration. But instead of targeting her ship, the weapon was focusing on something far more significant: the quantum signatures of every Velthari world within a 50 light-year radius. The silence that followed Darius's words stretched across the void like a held breath. High Executor Vaxxris stared at her tactical displays, watching quantum signatures flicker. As the human's consciousness reached out across interstellar space, the Decimator Ray wasn't just targeting her remaining ship, it was somehow detecting every major Velthari installation within 50 light years. Impossible, she whispered, her harmonic voice barely audible in the empty bridge. No weapon can target across interstellar distances. The quantum coherence would collapse. Darius's laughter filled the communication channel, but it was different, now layered with digital harmonics that suggested his consciousness had evolved beyond human limitations. You're still thinking in terms of conventional physics, Vaxxris. I've been rewriting those rules for the past 8 hours through the array's modified sensors. Darius could indeed perceive the quantum signatures of distant worlds. His consciousness, distributed across the weapon's vast network of processing nodes, had learned to interpret space-time distortions in ways that would have been impossible for his original biological brain. Every Velthari ship, every orbital station, every planetary defense grid registered as discrete patterns in the quantum foam. The military installations around Velthara Prime, 3 to 7 light-years away, appeared to his enhanced senses as clearly as if they were in the same star system. The massive orbital shipyards above Corveth, the fortress moon of Drexia, the clone production facilities of Helix Station, all of them were within reach of his modified weapon. You have one opportunity to end this, Darius said, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who held the power of life and death over entire star systems. Broadcast a message to every Velthari world. Tell them that the human species is declaring independence from your empire. Tell them that any attempt to reclaim the colonies you've stolen will result in the complete erasure of your civilization, Vaxxhyrus. Her arms trembled as she considered her options. The humans' demonstrations had proven that conventional military force was useless against his modified weapon, but surrender would mean the end of everything the Empire had built over 3 millennia of conquest. The High Council will never accept such terms, she replied, trying to inject some authority back into her voice. We have conquered the 100 species. We will not be dictated by humans. Then you'll share their fate, Darius said with terrible finality. The decimator ray discharged not with the visible flash of conventional weapons, but with a subtle distortion that seemed to bend light itself. Quantum energy, carefully modulated to maintain coherence across interstellar distances, reached out toward the Velthari homeworld through dimensions that existed parallel to normal spacetime. On Velthara Prime, the effect was immediate and horrifying. The planet's 3 orbital defense platforms simply ceased to exist, deleted from reality as cleanly as if they had never been built. The massive structures, each housing 50,000 Velthari military personnel, vanished without explosion or debris. They were simply edited out of existence by forces that operated beyond conventional physics. The demonstration was precisely calculated for maximum psychological impact. Darius could have destroyed the entire planet, but he chose surgical precision instead. The message was clear. Nowhere in the Empire was beyond his reach, and nothing they had built could protect them from his wrath. Emergency broadcasts flooded the Imperial communication networks as similar demonstrations occurred across 17 star systems. Orbital stations disappeared. Fortress moons flickered out of existence. Military installations that had stood for centuries were reduced to empty space in the span of seconds. But Darius was careful to target only military assets. Civilian populations were left untouched, witnesses to the surgical precision of human revenge. The message was unmistakable. This was not genocide, but justice. The Empire's military might was being systematically dismantled, but its people would survive to remember the consequences of their aggression. Stop. Vaxxhyrus's transmission crackled with desperation. We surrender. We accept your terms. The quantum discharges ceased immediately. Across the Empire, military commanders found themselves staring at empty space where their most powerful weapons had existed moments before. The invincible Velthari military machine had been neutered in less than an hour by a single human consciousness. Wielding physics as a weapon, broadcast the message, Darius commanded, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute authority. Every Velthari world, every colony, every space station, tell them that the human species is no longer their property. Vaxxhyrus activated her ship's emergency transmitters, sending the surrender message across the Imperial communication network. Her harmonic voice carried the burden of 3 millennia of conquest, as she spoke words that would echo through galactic history. By order of High Executor Vaxxhyrus, the Velthari Empire hereby recognizes the independence of all human-controlled territories. Military forces are ordered to withdraw from human space immediately. Any violation of this ceasefire will result in the total destruction of our civilization. The response was immediate and overwhelming across 17 star systems. Human resistance cells that had been fighting a losing battle for decades suddenly found themselves victorious. Velthari occupation forces, their command structure shattered and their weapons useless, began the first orderly retreat in Imperial history on the colony world of New Geneva. Resistance leader Captain Elena Vasquez watched through her bunker's viewscreen as Imperial dropships lifted off from population centers they had controlled for 8 years. The Velthari garrison commander, a warrior named Keltrix 7, actually transmitted a formal apology before departing, something unprecedented in Imperial military protocol. How? Vasquez whispered to her communications officer. How do we win? The answer came from space itself, broadcast on frequencies that every human receiver could detect. Darius Kestrel's voice, now more digital than organic, reached every free human in the galaxy. My people, he said, the words carrying the weight of 17 billion ghosts. You are no longer slaves. You are no longer prey. You are free because someone remembered that humans don't just fight to survive, we fight to ensure that survival has meaning. In the wreckage of the Dominator, the decimator ray powered down. For the first time in 12 hours, The weapon that had nearly destroyed humanity had instead delivered its salvation. Guided by the consciousness of an engineer who had turned the Empire's own cruelty against itself, Darius Kestrel's body remained dead in the execution chamber, but his consciousness lived on in the quantum matrices he had learned to call home. He had become something unprecedented, a human mind with the power to rewrite reality itself, a guardian who would ensure that humanity's freedom was never again threatened. The Velthari Empire, which had ruled 100 species across half the galaxy, would spend the next century learning to live as equals rather than conquerors. Some would call it justice. Others would call it mercy. Darius Kestrel would have called it engineering. In the end, he had solved the most complex problem of his career: how to ensure that his species would never again face extinction. The solution was elegant in its simplicity: turn the weapon of genocide into the instrument of liberation, and make the cost of aggression so high that even the most warlike species would choose peace. The human colonies were free, the Empire was broken, and somewhere in the quantum foam between dimensions, a consciousness that had once been human stood eternal watch over the galaxy, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. 17 billion deaths had been avenged, but more importantly, 17 billion future lives had been saved. The equation was balanced. The engineering was complete.